Rap singer Eazy-E has lost his battle with AIDS just 10 days after revealing that he had the disease.
Coming up in weather, John Burnett says died in England just one day after going public with the news that he had AIDS.
The disease that swept through the 1980s and 90s did not stop at the studio gate. It moved through dressing rooms, television sets, newsroom chairs, and concert halls, claiming people whose faces millions of Americans knew from their living room screens. Some of them went public, but most of them did not. Their death certificates listed other causes. Their families stayed quiet. The press moved on, but the truth eventually came out. These are 10 black celebrities who tragically died of AIDS, and the stories behind their final years that most people have never heard. Robert Christian appeared on American television screens nearly every single weekday for years, playing Detective Bob Morgan on the daytime drama Another World, one of the most watched soap operas in the country throughout the 1970s.
The condition severely weakens the body's ability to fight disease. Many victims get a rare form of cancer called Kaposi's sarcoma. Others get an infection known as pneumocystis pneumonia.
He was a daily presence in millions of households at a time when daytime television was the heartbeat of American home life, and showing up in a regular role on one of those programs meant your face was known everywhere without question. He worked steadily across television throughout his career, building a quiet but consistent body of work, until what came later was not quiet at all. He died in 1983, at a time when the disease had barely been named, when hospitals were still working out what they were dealing with, and when a diagnosis was essentially a sentence delivered in a language medicine was still learning to speak. He was among the earliest known black television actors to die of AIDS-related complications, taken before the decade had barely registered what was happening. The stigma at that moment was total. Families protected their loved ones through silence, and the industry moved on without acknowledgement. Robert Christian was part of the first wave, the people who faced the disease when there was no framework, no treatment, no language, and almost no public compassion available to help them face it. Before we get there, one of the hardest working voices in funk music, a man who kept showing up to perform even as the disease was already taking him apart from the inside, Wayne Cooper.
Medical experts say the disease kills 4 out of every 10 people it strikes and that it threatens to explode in the nation's cities.
Wayne Cooper powered the funk group Cameo through one of its most productive stretches, driving hits like Find My Way and helping set American dance floors on fire in the early 1980s, before HIV dismantled his body and silenced him at 34. Cameo was a fixture with a loyal following that extended far beyond radio play, and Cooper's energy was central to what the group projected on stage and on record. But behind the stage lights, his life had built a path toward danger long before the danger had a name. He moved through the party circuit that surrounded touring musicians in that era, nights running together, substances blurring the lines between one city and the next, and in the early 1980s, the risk arrived without warning. By mid-1983, he was noticeably drained, with mouth sores that would not heal, fevers that came and stayed, and weight dropping in ways that could not be explained away. He kept working because stopping would have required an explanation he was not prepared to give, and the disease was so new and so misunderstood that disclosure felt more dangerous than the illness itself. On October 15, 1984, Cooper died in an Atlanta hospital of severe pneumonia caused by AIDS-related complications. The cause was confirmed by the hospital but disclosed to almost no one. Cameo did not announce it immediately, the press did not pursue it, and years later the story came out only in fragments. A musician who brought people to their feet died alone in a hospital room at 34, and the industry that benefited from his talent barely marked his passing. Next, the man who broke open a door in American television that had been locked shut for the entire history of the genre, and paid a price no one talked about until years after he was gone. Raymond St. Jacques. Raymond St. Jacques became the first black actor ever cast in a regular role on a primetime American Western series when he joined Rawhide in 1965 as cattle drover Simon Blake, and he spent the next 25 years of his career making sure that milestone was not the only thing he left behind.
Federal health officials say as many as 1 million Americans may have been infected with the AIDS virus, and more than 12,000 are expected to develop the deadly disease next year. Now that would double the number of cases since 1981 nationwide.
His real name was James Arthur Johnson. He grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, attended Yale, and moved to New York to pursue acting in an era when the odds for a black actor in mainstream television were nearly impossible. He became a member of the Actors Studio, logged hundreds of stage performances, appeared in films including Cotton, Comes to Harlem, and Glory, where he played Frederick Douglass, and from 1988 to 1989 played Judge Clayton Thomas on the syndicated series Superior Court. He was also a civil rights activist who was arrested in 1985 during a protest outside the South African Embassy in Washington, and he was consistently loud about the industry's failure to cast black actors across genres. He was never a man who stayed quiet about anything that mattered. He died on August 27, 1990 in Los Angeles from AIDS-related lymphoma at the age of 60. The official announcement listed lymphoma without further detail, and the full truth only emerged afterward. A pioneer who spent 3 decades pushing doors open died just as one of the century's most devastating diseases was reaching its peak, without the recognition that his death was part of that larger story. After him, a Juilliard-trained actor who critics called one of the most compelling stage performers in the country, remembered by most people only for a sitcom that never came close to showing what he could actually do. Franklin Seals. Franklin Seals trained at Juilliard on a full scholarship, built a career that stretched from Shakespeare to network sitcoms, and died at 37 in his family's home in Brooklyn, having been too sick to work for months and unable to tell almost anyone why. He is most remembered as Dexter Stuffins, the fastidious business manager on the NBC sitcom Silver Spoons, which ran from 1983 to 1987 alongside Ricky Schroeder and John Houseman. It was a role that millions of American families watched every week in primetime, and Seals played it with a calibration that made a comedic foil feel like a real person. But he was regarded by peers and critics alike as one of the most compelling stage actors in the country, a performer with a range the television industry never fully used.
On the witness stand, Dr. Ari Rubenstein, a renowned figure in AIDS treatment, who said he knew of no child with AIDS who had ever shown improvement after being diagnosed.
He was born in Caliacqua, St. Vincent, in the West Indies, grew up in Brooklyn, and built everything he had through training and discipline from modest beginnings. Seals contracted HIV through sexual contact and kept his diagnosis private until he could no longer work, with his sister Deborah Richardson later confirming the cause of his death. He died on May 14, 1990, and his ashes were scattered in the Caribbean Sea, returned to the water near the island where his life had started. A biography published in 2011 documented his life and work, but outside of that, he is largely absent from the cultural memory he deserved. The story that follows is about a man who went on national television to lie about why he was dying, because telling the truth would have cost him everything he had left. Larry Riley. Larry Riley appeared gaunt and visibly unwell when Knots Landing's 12th season began in 1992, and when the National Enquirer threatened to publish a story about his failing health, he went on Entertainment Tonight himself and told the cameras he had kidney failure from high blood pressure. It was not true. He had AIDS and had known since 1990, telling no one except his wife, Nina. Riley had been the first regular black cast member in the history of Knots Landing, joining the long-running CBS primetime soap opera in 1988 as Frank Williams, a middle-class attorney and family man whose role represented something genuinely rare on screen at the time, a black professional in a primetime drama with dignity, complexity, and a full family life. Before that, he had originated the role of Private C.J. Memphis in the Pulitzer Prize-winning Broadway production A Soldier's Play, received an Obie Award for his performance, and built a reputation as a serious actor doing serious work.
This cancer has a death rate of 80% 2 years after diagnosis. AIDS also causes unusual infections, with death rates of 100% in 2 years. This is not a benign disease, nor is it limited to gays, as we are now finding out.
He had also fought drug and alcohol addiction for most of his adult life, entering rehab in May 1989, and the following year the HIV diagnosis arrived. His wife later said he contracted the virus through heterosexual contact. He kept working because disclosure would have destroyed his career, and when his weight loss became impossible to hide on camera, he constructed a cover story and went on television and delivered it. He died on June 6, 1992 in Burbank, California, 14 days before his 39th birthday, of AIDS-related renal failure, with his wife and doctor only disclosing the real cause after his death. From a soap opera set in New York to a newsroom desk in Chicago, the next name on this list made American broadcast history and spent the years that followed paying for it in ways the cameras never caught. Max Robinson. Max Robinson sat at the anchor desk of ABC World News Tonight in 1978 and became the first African American to anchor a nightly network news broadcast in the history of American television, sharing the desk with Peter Jennings in London and Frank Reynolds in Washington, while Robinson anchored from Chicago, an arrangement that felt less like a triumvirate and more like a strategic placement that put the historic hire at a careful remove from the center of power. He knew it and said so publicly. At a 1981 speech at Smith College, Robinson spoke about racism at ABC News, about the one-dimensional portrayal of Black Americans in the network's broadcasts, and about what it cost to be the first in a system that was not built with you in mind. The speech cost him professionally. When Reynolds died in 1983, Peter Jennings was named sole anchor, and Robinson was moved to a weekend position, eventually leaving ABC entirely for a local, an NBC station in Chicago, where he routinely failed to show up, entered rehab for alcohol abuse, and retired in 1985. The drinking was not separate from carrying the weight of a historic first for years in an environment that offered almost no structural support for what he was being asked to be. He was diagnosed with HIV in 1987 and told almost no one, keeping his diagnosis private because his primary concern was what his illness might say about Black Americans at a moment when AIDS was being weaponized as a tool of stigma and racial scapegoating. He became visibly ill while delivering a speech at Howard University in the fall of 1988, was hospitalized, and did not recover. He died on December 20th, 1988, at the age of 49, with his publicist attributing the death to cancer and his family confirming the truth only afterward. Jesse Jackson delivered the eulogy. Before he died, Robinson told a confidant that he wanted to be remembered as someone who helped Black Americans understand the danger of AIDS, a message he never delivered publicly, held back by the same silence that had defined so much of his final years. What comes next is different from every other story on this list, because the man you are about to hear about did nothing that put him at risk and still lost everything. Kevin Peter Hall. Kevin Peter Hall was 7 feet 2 inches tall, built a career playing monsters and giants that no other actor in Hollywood could physically portray, and contracted HIV from a contaminated blood transfusion during surgery following a car accident through no action of his own and with no warning whatsoever. He grew up in Pittsburgh, the tallest of 7 brothers, all over 6 feet, played basketball on a scholarship at George Washington University, where he also studied theatrical arts, and eventually made his way to Los Angeles, where his stature made him uniquely valuable. He played the creature in the Predator franchise opposite Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Sasquatch Harry in Harry and the Hendersons, performances that required him to convey warmth, fear, and humor entirely through body movement while buried beneath layers of prosthetics. He described himself as a puppeteer from the inside, using his arms and body to give his creatures a sense of personality, and he brought emotional specificity to roles that most actors would have treated as purely physical. He met his wife Elena Reed on the set of the television show 227, and they married both on screen and in real life.
75% of cases are homosexuals, but 14% are heterosexual drug addicts. 5% are non-drug using heterosexuals with no other risk factors. 5% are Haitian refugees, and 1% are hemophiliacs.
While working on the television series Harry and the Hendersons in 1990, Hall publicly announced his HIV diagnosis, an unusual choice in an era when most people in his situation were hiding the fact entirely. His health declined rapidly through the show's first season before his illness forced him to leave the role, and on April 10, 1991, he died from AIDS-related pneumonia in Hollywood, California, 1 month short of his 36th birthday. His was a case the disease had no personal logic to, an innocent passenger in someone else's medical failure, struck down by a contaminated bag of blood in an era when the screening systems were not yet equipped to prevent it. From the newsroom to the dance floor, a singer who built one of the most recognizable hits of the 1980s by preaching restraint and quietly lived by the opposite of what the world assumed about him. Jermaine Stewart. Jermaine Stewart scored one of the unlikeliest hits of the 1980s with We Don't Have to Take Our Clothes Off. In 1986, a song that built its seduction out of restraint rather than excess and charted across the United States, the United Kingdom, and beyond, while its creator was becoming a regular presence on Soul Train and music countdown programs across American television.
Has been done in New York, and they found that as many as 85% of otherwise healthy gay men showed evidence of imbalance in these tests of the immune system.
Stewart was born in Columbus, Ohio, grew up in Chicago, and came to Los Angeles in the late 1970s, where he found his way into the orbit of pop music through dancing and session work before stepping out as a solo performer. He was an energetic stage presence and a warm television personality, and his career continued steadily through the 1980s, even when the follow-up records never replicated the commercial peak of his biggest hit. Behind that visibility, he was living with a disease he kept private until his body made privacy impossible. By the early 1990s, his health deteriorated through complications affecting his liver, and he withdrew from public life, speaking about what was happening only in limited ways to people he trusted in his final years. He died on March 17, 1997, in Chicago, from AIDS-related liver cancer at the age of 39. And for a man whose face and voice had been a presence in American homes throughout the 1980s, the silence at the end of his story was stark. Stick around, because the next one is a story about what happens when raw talent meets zero discipline, and a disease finds someone who never stopped moving long enough to protect himself. Gene Anthony Ray. Gene Anthony Ray was fired from Fame after missing work more than 100 times, lost his money to drugs and alcohol, spent time sleeping on park benches in Milan during a failed attempt to open a dance school, and in 1996 was diagnosed HIV positive. All of this happening to a man who had been a global television star for 5 straight years.
None have been cured.
Death didn't scare me. It was living with this for a long time. That's more frightening than death.
He was born in Harlem on May 24, 1962, and grew up on West 153rd Street, where he taught himself to dance at block parties with almost no formal training. He attended the High School of the Performing Arts, but was expelled after 1 year, with his mother describing him as too wild for the discipline. He auditioned for Fame by skipping school, got the part, and the 1980 film and the television series that followed from 1982 to 1987 made Leroy Johnson the raw talented street dancer with zero patience for structure and total instincts for movement, one of the most recognized characters on American television internationally. The show was also where the self-destruction embedded itself fully. The fame brought money, the money funded the habits cost him the role in 1984, and the years that followed were a slow and painful unraveling across 2 continents. In 2003, he filmed a BBC reunion documentary, looking thin and weak, suffered a stroke in June of that year, and died in Manhattan on November 14, 2003, from AIDS-related complications at the age of 41. He never married and never directly discussed his sexuality, and the dancer who made the world believe that raw talent was enough died having proved, at great personal cost, that it was not. From the streets of Harlem to the last person on this list before our final story, an Oscar-nominated actor whose career collapsed under the weight of addiction before AIDS took what was left. Howard Rollins. Howard Rollins was nominated for an Academy Award in 1981 for his role in Ragtime, starred in A Soldier's Story in 1984, and became a household name as Detective Virgil Tibbs in the television drama In the Heat of the Night, before drug addiction dismantled his career and AIDS ended his life at 46, with only 6 weeks between his diagnosis and his death. He was born in Baltimore in 1950, studied theater at Towson State College, and moved to New York in 1974, where his career quickly built into something serious. His performance in Ragtime as Coalhouse Walker Jr. earned him an Oscar nomination alongside an Emmy nomination for his earlier work on the soap opera Another World, establishing him as one of the most compelling dramatic actors of his generation. In the Heat of the Night arrived in 1988, starring Carroll O'Connor as the chief of police and Rollins as his partner, a black detective from Philadelphia who was nobody's subordinate, and the show connected immediately with audiences across the country. But substance abuse had been running parallel to the career for years, and the legal problems accumulated steadily through DUI charges, cocaine possession, additional arrests, and eventually a month in jail for reckless driving in 1994 that got him written out of the show entirely. Carroll O'Connor publicly defended him and made clear his sympathy was genuine, though the sympathy did not save the job. Rollins spent the years that followed working on sobriety and rebuilding his career in smaller roles before being diagnosed with AIDS in the fall of 1996, with his publicist issuing a statement citing lymphoma. 6 weeks later, on December 8, 1996, he died at St. Luke's Roosevelt Hospital in New York City at the age of 46, with his family confirming afterward that the lymphoma was AIDS-related.
That the problem with us as a people is that we have not learned to love ourselves or each other, that we are still in contention with our history, with our identities, with our past.
And to close this out, a Harvard-educated filmmaker who put Black life on American television screens in ways nobody had dared to before, and kept making his final documentary from a hospital bed while the disease was actively killing him. Marlon Riggs. Marlon Riggs won an Emmy Award for his very first documentary, graduated magna cum laude from Harvard, became the youngest tenured professor at UC Berkeley's Graduate School of Journalism, and died at 37 from AIDS-related complications in April 1994, still trying to finish his final film from a hospital bed. He was born in Fort Worth, Texas in 1957, grew up moving between military bases in Georgia and West Germany, and designed his own curriculum at Harvard around the history of gay men in literature. When he moved to California and started making documentaries, his focus was clear from the beginning. He wanted to take what he was learning and put it on television screens in front of people who would never set foot in a university. His first major film, Ethnic Notions, aired on PBS in 1987 and won the Emmy. His third, Tongues Untied, became the first documentary about black gay male experience ever broadcast on American television through PBS's POV series in 1991. Over 100 PBS affiliates refused to show it. The ones that did aired it with constant disclaimers, and during the 1992 presidential campaign, Pat Buchanan used unauthorized clips as political attack material, calling it federally funded pornography. Riggs had received exactly $5,000 to make it. His response was to keep working. He had been diagnosed with HIV while filming Tongues Untied and disclosed his status openly rather than hiding it. When he began his fourth documentary, Black as Black Ain't, he was already critically ill. The film documented African American identity across class, religion, sexuality, and politics, and several sequences show Riggs himself connected to hospital machines, providing narration from his bed, in a race against a clock that everyone watching already knew he was going to lose. He died on April 5th, 1994, in Oakland, California, before the film was finished. His production team completed it according to his notes, and it premiered on PBS in 1996. He spent his final months filming himself, dying because he believed the act of being seen mattered more than the act of disappearing quietly. For a man who built his entire career on refusing to be invisible, it was the only ending that made any sense. Which of these stories hit you the hardest? Let us know in the comments below. And if you have not already, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you never miss the next one.